America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Alfredo Ortiz, president and CEO of Job Creators Network.
Please subscribe to the show at salempodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. Today, Alfredo, I'm very excited to be talking to Andy Puzder, who's the former CEO of CKE Restaurants. He's also the chairman of Second Vote Value Investments and a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. And he's also a former board member for the Job Creators Network. Andy's going to be discussing the rising threat of woke capitalism, the whole ESG movement, and how we fight back against it. And of course, I'm sure we'll hit on some economic policy points because that's Andy's interest as well. But Andy's efforts to fight woke capitalism is very timely. We've seen Bud Light and Target continue to draw headlines for their decisions to put wokeness over profitability, which of course hurts their share value tremendously. And as well as their employees and just their brand overall. And, you know, you're a brand guy, you understand the importance of that.
I am.
And of course, you know, as we all remember, we have a lot of experience weighing in on this whole woke capitalism back in 2021 when Georgia passed that voter election law that really increased voter integrity and increased the voting days available for people and made it easier to vote, but harder to cheat, right? But we stepped into that when Major League Baseball pulled the All-Star game out of Georgia and hurt all of the small businesses that had been waiting patiently for like 2 years for this game to come, been through a pandemic, been shut down like everybody else. And they were looking forward to having that kind of revenue come into the state. I think the estimate was somewhere around $100 million revenue into the state. And here we saw the commissioner of MLB baseball pull the game. It boggles the mind how baseball would step into this.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, when you think about the impact that it had to the small business community in Atlanta, I'm actually here in Atlanta. And so it was very near and dear to me because a lot of people got hurt. And like I said, in particular, small business owners, and even more in particular, are minority small business owners. You know, Atlanta is about 51%, a minority community. And so to move it from here to Denver, which is about 9% of a minority community, just made absolutely no sense. You're right, about $100 million impact. And Elaine, remember, that is actually one of the biggest reasons why we decided to sue them, because of the impact, the negative impact that they had for moving that game out. And again, you know, it was over something that really wasn't true. Indeed, and then we saw the results a couple of years later, that it was basically the new law made it easier to vote and harder to cheat, exactly what the governor had laid out. And so, we were proud to take on that lawsuit. And I think that was actually kind of the beginning, I have to tell you, of the pushback on all these woke corporations, because you know, once we took them basically to court, I think we put a lot of corporations on notice that we're just not going to sit back and take it, and that somebody is watching. And I'm really proud, even though we didn't ultimately win that lawsuit, I'm proud that we stood up and did the right thing.
Yeah, but I think it's easy to write a headline and say that the case was dismissed. The reason, just to get into the weeds a little bit, because this is always like an important argument for me. We didn't get dismissed because we didn't have evidence of the damage that they caused. We did. We got dismissed because the judge ruled that we didn't have standing ourselves as an
Right.
entity to bring the case. And we were arguing that we were going to bring it on behalf of small businesses in Atlanta. And so that's a huge distinction, because there's a hurdle you have to overcome in any litigation, and that's to prove that you are the harmed party in bringing the lawsuit. But we certainly won in the court of public opinion, without a doubt. And in the end, I think the Braves got their justice, because they ended up going.
Indeed.
I think that was the best icing on the cake for everybody, I think.
Yeah, yeah, no, it really was. And I mean, having actually been at the in the court in New York when we were actually trying the case, what did amaze me though was the callousness, quite frankly, of the judge. I have to tell you, I mean, listening to some of her comments saying, "I don't understand why you guys are suing." I mean, to me, it's a net zero sum game, a zero sum game issue, because okay, so you take $100 million from Atlanta and you send it over to Colorado. What's the difference? There's no harm. And I'm sitting there going, I couldn't even believe I was hearing what I was hearing, because obviously there is harm of $100 million of lost revenue to people who had been waiting for 2 years, who had spent money already getting the game ready. And just, I mean, it was so unfair. And quite frankly, again, I'm glad of the work we did, not only of the lawsuit, but frankly, the approach that we did, which was a little unconventional, and it did raise some eyebrows. I think if you remember the billboard that we put up, which we always try to get you to say on the media, which you're welcome to say right now.
Well, we put up a billboard that said, "Hey, Rob, all strikes, no balls." And I got to say that on national television as well. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And you had to do it with a straight face, and you did a great job of that. But
yeah, I can't do that with a straight face anymore.
yeah, well, we that was an interesting story, and just some background for people to know, because people never hear these stories. But the commissioner actually was trying to dodge service, if you remember that. So it took us a couple of days to track him down. What we had to do is we had to hire a couple of undercover agents, basically, or detectives, I should say, to try to track him down. And when we did, we finally served him. We actually put 2 mobile billboards outside of the office of the MLB, and also outside of his home in Upper Manhattan, Upper East Side Manhattan, that said, "Hey, Rob, you've been served. To see it in court." And so I think we were a real pain to him, a real thorn in his side. But I'm glad, because he deserved it. He hurt a lot of people here in Atlanta. And hopefully, corporations did get that message that at least somebody was watching and somebody was going to do something about it.
I was just going to jump in, and clearly the more recent cases of Bud Light and with some of the other brands, Disney, obviously, I think are learning that if you get into kind of these cultural or even legislative things that don't have a lot to do with your brand. Voting rules in Georgia had very little to do with baseball. And I think up until this point, a lot of folks have thought, well, we will do these things and we'll get positive PR for weighing in. And I think they're realizing that if it has nothing to do with their business, maybe they should keep their mouth shut and focus on their customers and their product, because it's a no-win situation for them. And I think it should be a no-win situation for them. If you're Disney, you make movies that entertain children. Maybe you stop there.
Well, that was the interesting thing about Disney is, their very own website that has their mission. Basically, they have a mission to entertain children and families. And, the CEO of Disney at the time, who's no longer there, I might add, stepped into this and said that their main mission their goal would be to take this law that was passed through the Florida legislature, signed into law by Governor DeSantis, that there was a parental rights law that basically said this type of conduct will not be taught in schools or talked about in schools to children, from kindergarten to 3rd grade, and so you want to take a step back and say, well, let's make sure we have appropriate conduct content being taught to kids. And here the CEO said, we're going to take this to court and fight it. That was their new goal, their new stated goal.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with their bottom line, it had nothing to do with their shareholders. And it was just a ridiculous position to take. And what was more ridiculous was a few months later, his contract came up and he was unanimously voted back in by the board, saying that he had done a fantastic job. Now, we know what happened later. He was replaced, but I just couldn't believe that they were just piling on again. Alfredo, you're a brand guy. I mean, think how badly this has hurt Disney's brand to be in this feud with the state of Florida and the governor.
Yeah, well, I mean, the stock hit's been, pretty apparent and pretty amazing. And Jamie, you mentioned Bud Light. It's interesting. If you go back to the MLB stuff, remember how many companies chimed in, along with MLB? It was Delta, it was Coca-Cola, right? I mean, company after company was chiming in, agreeing, signing, I think, a support for the pullout. Isn't it interesting that I haven't heard from Coca-Cola, I haven't heard from Delta anything about the Bud Light issue and what's happening there? It's like, I think they learned their lesson. Maybe we should just be silent.
Well, and I sympathize. Sometimes you get activist employees who really say, well, we should weigh in on this. And I think a lot of this is the they're trying to relieve short-term pain without a look at the long-term situation. And so in the short term, they want to appease employees that feel strongly about these things. But I think they're better off to have a straight policy that says, hey, we're not going to weigh in on things that don't relate to our business. That's just how we're going to do this. Because you just open yourself up to a whole host of problems. And which side are you going to listen to? Your customers, your employees, your shareholders, all of that. It's kind of like when you're a parent and you appease the child who wants to not go to bed, and you give them that extra drink of water, and you give them that extra snack, and you read them the extra story. It appeases them for that moment, but in the long term, everybody's a lot happier when they know the rule is you go to bed.
Right. Exactly, Jamie. But there is one instance where I think companies, no matter what side, should be weighing into issues. And that's when there's a policy, a government policies that is going to impact their ability as a business to compete and grow and create jobs, whether it's tax policy or, whether it's, access to capital or things like that. These CEOs should be stepping out there and saying, hang on, this is going to hurt not only our business, but the overall economy. And they should be telling the legislators that, the media, and their employees, and educating them about how this particular policy put forth by this politician or this group, how it's going to impact their business and ultimately employees' jobs. That's what they have a responsibility for, is to educate those parties and protect their shareholder value if they're a publicly traded company. If they're a small business, we believe and support employers, small business owners, talking to their employees about policy and how it impacts their companies.
Yeah, and I think as long as they're not telling them how to vote, right? Because I don't think that's the responsibility of a company. Just let them know the facts and let them decide.
Yeah, I agree that is the exception when it comes to policies that will directly affect the bottom line of the company, or in some cases the ability for the company to even exist. Then they do have an obligation to weigh in.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, let's get to our interview with Andy Puzder. I'm really excited to have him on and talk to him more about this and other issues. Andy is the former chief executive of CKE Restaurants, where he helped turn Hardee's and Carl's Jr. into a globally known fast food powerhouse. He's the chairman of Second Vote Value Investments and a senior fellow at Heritage Foundation. He's a lecturer on economics and politics for various groups and associations, as well as at colleges and universities. And as I mentioned earlier, he's also a former board member on the Job Creators Network board. He's also a frequent commentator on economic and business issues, appearing regularly on Fox News, and he's in the Wall Street Journal. He's also the author of The Capitalist Comeback, The Trump Boom, and The Left's Plot to Stop It, as well as The Encounter Broadsides, Getting America Back to Work, and It's Time to Let America Work Again. Welcome to the show, Andy. Thanks for joining us.
A pleasure to be here, Elaine. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Alfredo, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. Andy, again, thank you so much for coming on to our podcast. As you know, brand new for us, but it's exciting because finally, I think small business gets its day in court, so to speak, and we have an opportunity to talk about the challenges and tribulations of being a small business owner. And I know you obviously have been close to a lot of small businesses, heading up CKE Hardee's and Carl's Jr. and a lot of the franchisees that you worked with. So we're going to get into that. But first of all, I did want to just thank you also personally, because you've been such a friend to me and to the organization, and your leadership really over the years has really been invaluable. So thank you so much for that.
It's my pleasure, Alfredo. It's been great to know you and Elaine and Bernie, and it's a great group, and you've done great work. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Andy. Well, listen, I know when I first met you, you told me kind of your story about how you got to that point, even how you got to the point of being the CEO of CKE Hardee's. And it's kind of interesting because everybody talks about journeys in life. And I think your journey to get to where you are right now was pretty interesting. So do you want to just spend a few minutes on that so our listeners get an understanding of your background?
Sure. Well, back in the, 1980s, I was an attorney in private practice living in St. Louis, and I represented a gentleman named Carl Karcher, who was an incredible person, a real entrepreneur, and started a business called Carl's Jr., which turned into CKE Restaurants. This is a guy with an 8th grade education from Northern Ohio. During the Depression, his family couldn't feed him. He's like 6'5" and weighed 220 pounds. So he went out to California to try and see what he could do, and ended up buying a hot dog cart. And by the time I met him, it was a $500 million publicly traded company with 600 restaurants in the Western United States. I ended up being the general counsel for that company, the head of franchising and general counsel. And I was brought in because CKE was doing a transaction where they were buying, Carl's Jr. was buying a company called Hardee's. They were buying the Hardee's restaurant brand. There were about 1,000 Carl's Jr. and about 3,000 Hardee's. So it really was the minnow swallowing the whale.
Wow.
But I put the deal together, and after it was closed, I went to Rocky Mount, North Carolina, where Hardee's was headquartered. They had a big meeting to decide what the strategy was going to be, and they decided they were going to put Carl's hamburgers in Hardee's, and this would be the great solution to bring Hardee's back. It had really been a declining brand. I never going to change the name to Carl's Jr. All they were going to keep was Hardee's breakfast. And I was the only guy in the meeting that ever lived in the Midwest, where Hardee's was. Everybody else was from California. I said, I don't think this will work. I think people are going to say, who's Carl Jr. and where's my Hardee's? Right. Everybody laughed at me and told me to go do a deal or buy something. And so I went out and did some lawyer stuff for a few years. I also was general counsel at Fidelity National Financial, and we bought Chicago Title in that period of time. Anyway, it's now, that was 1997. By 2000, the stock in CKE had gone from $42 a share after we bought Hardee's down to $2 a share.
Wow.
And because they tried to turn Hardee's into Carl's Jr. and they couldn't do it. It didn't work. And so there was a board meeting, and I was secretary of the board. I walked into the board meeting thinking, well, I hadn't done, I told them not to do this. I'm not in any trouble. It's not like I didn't, this wasn't my idea. And the directors were meeting in the corner, and they called me over, and Bill Foley, who was the CEO of the company and chairman at that time, said, Andy, come here. You're going to be the new president of Hardee's. I said, excuse me, why would you make me the president of Hardee's? And Byron Allenbaugh, who ran Ralph Markets at the time and became our chairman of the board, came over and said, no, Andy's going to be president and CEO. Bill, you sort of had your shot at this, and it didn't work. And Bill laughed. He said, okay, Andy, you're the president and CEO of Hardee's. Good luck. And I said, why? He said, well, you're the only guy that knew this wouldn't work. So, so that's how I became the president and CEO of Hardee's and eventually CKE Restaurants. And 17 years later, we had grown to over 4,000 restaurants, 1,000 of them internationally, and we had done $4 billion in system-wide revenue that year, over $4 billion. And on a net basis, over the prior 2 or 3 years, we had opened more new restaurants than any of our competitors. So really took the company from near bankruptcy to a very successful brand or brands when I left.
Yeah.
Who knew? It worked. I was either I was lucky or the company was lucky, one of the two.
Well, I don't think it was luck. I mean, definitely, I'm sure it was skill. But Andy, I have to ask, because right about a few years ago when I really got to know you, you were actually still working on an ad at Carl's Jr. that got had some controversy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, we did a series of ads with very attractive young ladies eating burgers. The first one was with Paris Hilton. She was washing a Bentley. It became
got a lot of attention.
Yeah, well, it became a very iconic ad of the
did.
early first half of the first 10 years of the
Yeah.
2000s of this century. Then we ended up doing ads with Kim Kardashian, Kate Upton, a number, Padma, Lakshima, a number of very nice. I mean, I met some of them, not all of them. I really didn't go to. I went 1 or 2 commercial shoots, not very many. But the ads were very successful. We had a lot of opposition from the right, like the Million Moms, Million Dads were kind of upset
Right.
about. But our sales always went up. Like our target market.
Yeah.
This is the Bud Light lesson. Don't offend your target market. Well, our target
Exactly.
market was young, hungry guys, and so sales kept going up. We never did get any complaints from the left. There was no women's movement resistance or anything, and no Me Too. Now, you couldn't do those ads today, I don't think, because there's been such a turnaround on that. But at the time, they were fun ads, they were successful ads, and they appealed to our target market, and they drove the business. They brought in sales.
Well, the reason I brought it up, because I did want to also talk a little bit about the Bud Light, because obviously we know what's happening there, but understanding your target market is something so important that I know even our small business owners, really would love to get some of your thoughts on how do you really understand your target market, and how do you make sure that you don't lose them like Bud Light has done?
You have to do a lot of research to figure out who you want to target. For Carl's and Hardee's, it was a process. We were 2 small regional brands competing with very large national brands that spent a tremendous amount of money on advertising. We were spending about $125 million a year on advertising. McDonald's was spending $1 billion. That was just McDonald's, let alone Wendy's and Burger King and these other large chains. So we decided that if we went, McDonald's really was the family brand, women, kids, family. Burger King was kind of inexpensive food. Wendy's was to an older demographic, kind of baby boomers. So look, the largest purchaser of burgers are young guys between the age of 18 and 34. So we decided to call them young, hungry guys. That was and we identified that as our target market. But when you target young, hungry guys, you also target older people who, like me, I was in my 50s at the time, but I wanted to be a young, hungry guy. And I had a daughter at the time who was single. She wanted to date young, hungry guys. I mean, you reach a broad, reach a broader demographic than your specific target. But you need to pick that target. Then you need to have advertising that addresses them, lets them know who you are and that you're there for them, so they feel like they're in a place that represents them when they're in there. And you need to offer products that meet that demographic's needs, which is what we did with big, juicy, delicious burgers for young, hungry guys. We first guys to come out with half-pound and third-pound fast food burgers, and then our ads. We also had ads with attractive guys in them, by the way, that nobody cared. It's only the ads with the attractive women that seem to really throw up any dust. And in any event, you need to know who your target market is, pick it, know who it is, and then just pursue it and ignore everything else. I mean, Bud Light just completely screwed. I don't know how on earth that woman that made the decision to do this got into their ad department for years and years. Anheuser-Busch had the most incredible advertising. We used to look at them with envy, for the great ads that they ran.
I remember watching them at Super Bowl.
This is such a mistake. But Disney's done the same thing. If you're the company that's trying to appeal to women and kids, and you have these great theme parks and these great properties for streaming on TV, I mean, they've got Star
Oh, yeah.
Wars and the Marvel superhero
Yeah.
series. They've got incredible, but then they go out and they do things that offend really half of their target market. Half of the target market is conservative. So if you're really promoting these leftist ideals, rather than trying to stay politically neutral, which Disney was for years, if you leave that, you're really going to hurt yourself. And I think that
Yeah.
the right, these families have kind of woken up. It wasn't just Bud Light, but also I would say Target. You go after our kids, and guess what? We get a little irritated. And I think that Target is seeing the reaction to that and has had a tremendous drop in shareholder value, which I don't own shares of Target. If I did, I'd be kind of upset with management.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this leads in nicely to the conversation we had leading up to having you on. Elaine, I know we were talking a lot about kind of wokeism and what companies are doing. Do you want to kind of go down some of the questions that we had for Andy on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Americans are waking up to the wokeism because we're Americans are being put in a position to protect their kids, and they're coming out, with fangs and claws on it. And these companies are suffering as a result. Hopefully, getting the message. We certainly sent a strong message to Disney last year when they stepped into this culture war on the parental rights law in Florida. But when you look at the ESG side of things, environmental social governance, can you talk to our audience about the kind of threat that Americans face from that aspect of it? And I know woke plays in there, the woke capitalism plays in there. But I don't think people really understand ESG, how it's being, hoisted upon Americans, and really how it impacts them personally.
Sure. ESG investing, as you said, is environmental, social, and governance. And it really is a theory of investing where your goal isn't to generate returns for the people on whose behalf you're investing money, whether a 401k, or if you have a pension plan or a mutual fund, or if you have some investment manager managing your funds. If they're managing them on an ESG criteria basis, they're not trying to increase the returns, the financial returns for you. They're trying to accomplish political and social goals that are dictated by this leftist ESG agenda. It's really a neo-Marxist agenda. And it's a way that corporate elites can seize the power of the private sector and use it to avoid the inconvenience and messiness they find in our ballot box, our representative, our constitutional republic with a representative democracy to elect our officials. They don't like that. That's kind of messy. You got to vote for people. And our free market economy, where rather than elites making the decisions as to the direction of the economy, we decide. We decide with our dollars. We vote with every dollar we spend as to whether it's BlackBerry that's going to succeed, or it's the iPhone, or it's Android. We're the ones who decide, not government elites. Two very, very effective and productive systems that have lifted billions of people out of poverty. Free market capitalism has lifted billions and billions of people out of poverty since the United States adopted it as their economic system, and then that spread across the globe. So this is a real threat. ESG investing is a threat to our democracy, our representative democracy. It's a threat to our free market economy, and it's a threat to our individual liberty. It's a threat to our representative democracy because these investment managers that invest trillions and trillions of our dollars, right, pressure the CEOs of the companies in which they invest to pursue these leftist goals on the environment or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they force the CEOs to implement these policies that you can't get passed at the ballot box because they're just not popular. And it's a threat to our free market economy because they compel the CEOs of these companies to place these ESG goals, these leftist political goals, above their obligation to generate returns for the people whose money they're investing. And it's a threat to our individual liberty because they figured out how to use our money to do this. So this is an horrific threat. if you have an investment, a mutual fund, a 401k, a pension fund, make sure with your investment managers, whoever's handling your money, that they understand you do not want your money invested in these ESG funds, because you will be promoting things, you will be supporting things in which you don't believe.
You know what? I've heard, Andy, that in some places, for example, like in China, there's something that's called a social score that people are given, and that's part of kind of the whole umbrella of the ESG. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, what you've heard, and how that could possibly even happen here?
Oh, sure. It's called the social credit score, and they actually monitor your activities. So that, for example, on the climate, the so-called climate change issue, if you're doing things where you burn too much carbon, you're driving your car, you're running your air conditioner, you get a lower ESG, you get a lower social credit score. If whatever activity you're engaged, if you support the wrong political party, you end up with a lower social credit score, and that makes it hard for you to get loans, to get a job, to get insurance, to do all of the things that are necessary for you to do throughout the day. Now, there are companies here in the United States that are promoting the ideal of a social credit score, an ESG score. You can actually go online and you'll see that there are websites that will give you your ESG, your score. Merrill Lynch I've seen Merrill Lynch financial statements. I'm not invested with Merrill Lynch, and this is one of the reasons, but they actually tell you on your report what your ESG score is. Now, they say they're doing that so you know what it is and you can adjust your conduct as you choose. But let's face it, these things are going to be used in the future to try and monitor our conduct, try and direct our conduct. You can see what's going on with social media, how they're trying to push us in one direction or another direction, like we're too smart to decide what direction to go in ourselves. This is what happens with ESG. This is a group of financial elites are trying to tell you how to live your life because they think they can run your life better than you can, which is the same. It's a centuries-old story going back to Karl Marx and socialism. This is the way these elites think. This is how they believe. Whether it's government elites or financial elites, it's your life, it's your independence, and it's about time people started to stand up for it.
But Andy, the end result and what a staff level person in some corporation or somebody working for a small business owner needs to understand is those investment decisions that they may not be aware of because it's in some mutual fund or EFT or something like that, or ETF. It's going to impact their return on investment. It's going to impact their savings, their retirement. And I don't think people fully understand how it personally impacts them, but I also don't think they understand, how do I fight back? If I work for a company that offers a 401k, I don't have control over where it's invested. What do people do in that regard?
The ALEC and Heritage Foundation have come up with model legislation. I worked with both entities to come up with this legislation, which makes it very clear that ESG investing and voting proxy statements pursuant to ESG goals is a violation of the fiduciary duty of loyalty that these investment managers owe to the people whose funds they're investing. So if you're in one of these 10 states, there's a very clear law that prohibits this conduct. In the other 40 states, there's common law. There was a suit filed in New York City by Gene Scalia, the former Secretary of Labor under Trump, going after some pension funds in the city of New York for divesting of fossil fuel companies, because 19 of the 20 top performing companies in 2022 were energy companies. So, I mean, they lost a tremendous amount of money for the pension fund beneficiaries in New York City and the city employees by following these ESG investment criteria, which it really is not something they should be doing at all. They're not in place to accomplish political goals. If you like climate change, if you think it's a good thing, you want to fight carbon emissions, go to the ballot box. That's why we have a ballot box. That's why we have elections, so you can elect people who will act on these issues. Do you really want a group of financial elites determining for you, not because of your vote, just determining for you because they manage your money and would vote without your consent at these shareholder meetings? Do you want them determining the future of this country? Do we want to have a corporatocracy where corporations run the country, or do we want to have a constitutional republic, which is what we inherited? I'd like to think when we pass this system on to the next generation, they're going to get a constitutional republic. Although Ben Franklin said that when he was asked coming out of the Constitutional Convention, they said, Ben, what system of government do we have? And he said, a republic if you can hold it. I think right now with ESG, what we're looking at is whether or not we can hold it. So it's very important that people understand this and react.
How do our listeners find out which 10 states have passed this legislation?
Well, if you get the Wall Street Journal, I had an article in the Wall Street Journal last week that listed the states and discusses this legislation. There are more states that are going to enact legislation.
We'll attach that article, by the way, Andy, to this podcast. So folks who are interested online can get that as well.
Florida passed a law. I'm not going to remember every state. Florida, North Carolina, North Dakota. There's a bunch of them.
We'll find the article. I just want to direct our listeners to take a look at that.
Great.
Andy, I think to the social credit score again. I'm kind of almost just amazed when I think about what that could actually do to us in our lifestyles. I mean, I'm thinking back to the EV mandate. I mean, I could see this now where a social credit score you're given when, and you have a low social credit score, you can only fill your EV tank, once a week or something like that.
It's going to even be more. It'll be worse than that. Your social credit score, if it isn't high enough, if your ESG score isn't high enough, you might not get a good interest on a home loan. You might not even be able to get a home loan. Maybe your kids, because of their religion or their political affiliation, or the kind of car they drive, the kind of lifestyle they live, won't be able to get a home loan. Maybe they won't be able to get insurance on their life or on their car, on their homes. These are the kinds of things where they can raise or lower the price. They can deny or grant you access to products based on these ESG scores. This is a very dangerous development. We're trying to nip it in the bud. There are a lot of people out there fighting it right now, but we really need people to take a stand on this. And I think all of the Republican presidential candidates seem to get this. Ron DeSantis obviously has acted very strongly on it. Under President Trump, we had the first ESG regulations coming out of the Department of Labor. Mike Pence has taken a very strong stance on this. Vivek Ramaswamy, Vivek's all over this. In fact, I met Vivek and I've been friends for a number of years based upon our mutual opposition to this ESG. We were talking about this 3 years ago when you literally couldn't fill a restroom with the number of people that wanted to hear you talk about ESG. I mean, you bring it up. I'd bring it up like I'd be talking about socialism and capitalism, sort of my normal spiel. I'd be giving a speech and I'd bring up ESG, and you can see everybody's eyes glaze over. It's like when you bring up labor participation when you're talking about the unemployment rate, even though it's incredibly important and the basis for the unemployment, everybody's eyes glaze over. Well, that's the way it was with ESG and diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI as well, back 3 years ago. But over the past year, it's really caught fire, and I think people are coming around to understanding what a threat this is and how dangerous it is.
Yeah. And actually, for our small business owners, I was thinking how this would be, an issue that they should be concerned about. And I was thinking if you have a company that's given an ESG score, I would imagine that the only way that they can get that ESG score is probably by auditing their vendors, which are a lot of them are small business owners that service the large companies. Is that correct?
Yeah. In fact, there are a lot of companies, even private sector companies, that are being pressured to actually influence the conduct and the practices of their vendors. In other words, they're trying to get to vendors for various companies by going to the company and saying, you shouldn't use these people unless they agree to do X, Y, Z. The big threat for small businesses, I think ESG is a huge threat because of the climate implications and the different carbon regulations they've come up with. But diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is a real threat to small businesses, where these massive investment firms or government agencies attempt to impose on companies, on small businesses, an obligation to hire people not based on their qualifications, merit, and character, like Martin Luther King would advocate, but rather on their race or their sex. I mean, they're actually trying to get them to be racist and sexist in their selection of directors for their boards, executives for their companies, and employees for their companies. This is happening across our education establishment. It's happening across our corporate establishment, where these companies are all being pressured to become racist and sexist by following these DEI initiatives, which are horrific and really contrary to our best interests as a nation. Hopefully, at the education level, the Supreme Court's going to put an end to that soon. Haven't done it yet, but we're hopeful.
A case. Yeah, there's a case, right, against Harvard, I think, on
Harvard
this?
and the University of North Carolina. Should be decided soon, and I'm optimistic that we'll put an end to this insanity. Because if we don't, I don't know how we survive as a nation if we're out there admitting people to medical school not based on their qualifications to be doctors, but based upon their race or their sex. How about or people that we're training as airline pilots, or I mean, the list is huge. You think China's picking the least effective people, or people that aren't the most effective people to fill these positions? No, that's not what they're doing. They're not trying to get their young people to hate their country, which is something that's happening here on a very broad basis at our universities. And they're not discouraging people based on their race or their sex, or ignoring people's merit, qualifications, and character. We're really hurting ourselves. We're hurting our competitive position in the world. It's something we've dominated now for 200 years. We're going to walk away from the ideals that help make this the bastion of freedom and liberty that it is.
Yeah, if there's two jobs that diversity should not be the primary qualification, it would be my pilot and my surgeon.
Yes, they're right up there. But even just air traffic controllers, don't you want the best person directing the? I mean, not the best person. Look, I ran a big company, and our executive team, our labor force was incredibly diverse. I think we were 70% female and 71% minority, something in that range, at our general manager level, which is really the people that sort of run the business. And even at our upper executive levels, we were diversified, not because we tried to be diversified, but because if you hire people based on their qualifications, merit, and character, you end up with a diversified labor force. You end up with a diversified executive team. But trying to force that and elevating people that really aren't entitled or haven't earned positions or earned the recognition that they get is a real danger for this country. A danger for our business. It's a danger for our military. It's a danger for our education system. It's a real threat to who we are and what we've become as a people. And I hate to see it happening. I wish I could be more effective in bringing an end to it. Anything I can do, I will do, because this is important.
Well, it seems to have been done even all the way up to the Supreme Court, where President Biden literally said, I'm going to choose for our next Supreme Court a black woman.
Yeah, and I don't understand how saying that, or saying I'm going to pick for the Supreme Court a white person or a white man or a white woman or somebody who's Jewish. I mean, any of those comments seem to me not directed at the merit, qualifications, and character of the people, but based on their race or their sex, which is not. I think, if I'm not mistaken, maybe I'm going to wait for the Supreme Court to come out with their opinion, but I think that's against the Civil Rights Act, if not the Equal Protection Clause in the Constitution. So we need some change, and I hope the Supreme Court's going to stand up. We'll find out soon. I know you've got a case in front of them as well on these student loans. So we'll hopefully the court will bring sanity back to this nation.
Yeah. Elaine, you know that case pretty well, our Supreme Court case, the student loans, right?
I'm on the edge of my seat every Thursday and Friday waiting for that decision to come out.
It'll come out right around 4th of July, just before they leave town.
That's what we're thinking too. Friday the 30th at noon.
Well, as you guys know, I wrote the law that was upheld in the Webster case, that pro-life law, and it came out on July 3rd. I mean, that's a great time to release opinions, right around 4th of July. But they're leaving town, and it's it's the holiday, and nobody's paying attention. That's likely when they'll come out. You never know, but that's likely what the date will be.
Yeah. Well, we're ready. I know Elaine's ready.
Yeah, I think with a big case like that, you got $400 billion at stake. And millions of borrowers, waiting. If I were a Supreme Court justice, I think I'd get out of Dodge too.
Andy, by the way, on that one, it's Yeah, I'm kind of glad I'm seeing our side kind of move towards the direction which we were hoping they'd move in terms of the conversation on this, which is really, let's hold these colleges accountable. They're the ones that
Yes.
actually created the issue to begin with. Why aren't we coming after them?
Well, it's the colleges and the federal government. When I was in law school, I only got a loan my last year. I couldn't get any government help for college or the first 2 years of law school, but I did get a loan. But I had to go to a bank. And like the government would guarantee the loan, but the bank had to approve the loan, right?
Right.
So what President Obama did was he took the bank out of that scenario. So you didn't have the bank evaluating whether the loan could be repaid or whether the amount being lent was reasonable. You just had the government shoveling money to these kids whose credit ratings are great because they've never borrowed a dime. So the government shoveling money to these kids, and then the kids shoveled it to the administration, and you saw the number of administrators shoot way up, professors' salaries shoot way up as every school tried to compete with all this money they were getting, and you saw incredible inflation. But it really was pulling the banks out of that system,
Yeah.
and then allowing the government to just get the money to these education institutions. And strangely enough, these education institutions are now very strongly supporting these progressive causes because it's the progressive politicians that got them the money. So
Yep.
it was a bad situation to begin with. You almost have to be envious of how diabolical it was. I mean, it really was a diabolical process, and the people that are paying are these students who've incurred all these loans.
Yeah. Then this nationalization of our student loans, not being people understand that really happened under Obama, and I guess not very, very few people understand why that actually happened. But again, I think it was if my understanding is correct, it was to help fund Obamacare.
Yeah, it's a very insidious process. Yeah, they actually thought we'd eliminate the middleman, we can handle it better. Could you imagine the government thinking they could handle anything financially better than a bank? I mean, it was an absurd proposition, and
Right.
it's turned out to be very damaging to the entire country. It could be economically incredibly impactful.
Yeah.
Well, Andy,
Yeah.
we've been calling for Congress to haul the presidents of sort of the top offenders of these tuition increases into Congress and have hearings with them. I mean, I'd like to see them come in like they did with the banking CEOs and the auto executives and the tobacco executives. I mean, they caused this crisis. And if they win at the Supreme Court, if the government wins and these loans are forgiven, it's just a green light, a blank check to these colleges to keep raising the tuition because the money's going to come.
Well, it would be very strange if they did win at the Supreme. First of all, you're right. It would be a horrific signal and just another nail in our economic coffin, which Joe Biden seems to pound in regularly. But it would be very strange if the court didn't side with you in this case, because even President Obama, President Biden, and Nancy Pelosi have all admitted that the president doesn't have the power to do this. So I don't know. I don't think anybody realistically thinks that Biden has the power to do this. But I think that it was a vote getter for him heading into 2020. Much like draining our strategic petroleum reserves, they don't really care about the country's security. They'll do whatever they can to try and retain power, to remain in power. And I think this is just another element of that. They know they can't do this. They've admitted they can't do it. I don't know how much clearer it could be.
Well, we certainly think they can't do it. So,
yeah.
Well, I'll call you on the 30th or the 3rd, Andy.
Yeah.
We can chat as I'm about to go on Fox.
That sounds great.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. Love the conversation. Thanks for sharing your background and your knowledge about ESGs and the whole woke capitalism. Appreciate your time today. And for everyone listening, please subscribe to the show at salempodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts from.